Vertigo Nation, this is an episode that you are not going to want to miss. Coming up on this episode, we talk about the end of an era. We talk about the passing of Ozzy Osbourne. We talk about the passing of Hulk Hogan. And also dive into conflict avoidance and conflict resolution. You're not going to want to miss this. Stay tuned. This is Vertigo, the podcast that makes your head spin. Hey, Vertigo Nation. Welcome back to another episode. Thank you for joining me. If you are new here, yes, I say it every time, and I will continue to say it. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, please. I'm going to give you a second to do it right now before I go diving into today's topic, because this is the podcast that makes your head spin. And once you hear it once, you are not going to be disappointed, and you're going to want to come back. I promise you that. So go ahead, click the subscribe button. Do it now, and thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the Vertigo Nation, this is your host, Sean. Welcome back for another episode. And, boy, a lot to talk about today, actually. This is the end of an era, truly, for anybody who has been, hearing the news. There's always celebrity passings. But for me personally, the passing of Ozzy Osbourne and then days later, Hulk Hogan is just wow. I mean, as a kid of the 80s, I was born in 76. And so much of my childhood was obviously through the 80s and, of course, 90s. I graduated high school in 94. So, but really the 80s were my era, right? That's when I was a kid. That's when I was really growing up. And Ozzy Osbourne and Hulk Hogan both were predominant figures of the 80s. I mean, Hulk Hogan was on every television in America. The WWF, now the WWE, was just, professional wrestling was, I think, coming into its peak because of the personalities of, Hulk Hogan, of course, Andre the Giant, all those 80s greats, right? So any professional wrestling fan out there, when you really think of the heyday of professional wrestling, specifically the WWE, I mean, those 80s, right? I mean, those guys were larger than life. They were rock stars in their own right. And I think about all of those characters, but Hulk Hogan, right? I mean, he was the guy. I wouldn't know what professional wrestling was if it weren't for Hulk Hogan, right? Because he was just that guy. He had that, there's those guys that they talk about in the industry, right? If you're a fan of pop culture and film and the arts, right? Music, whatever, you always hear about the it factor, right? That these celebrities have something about them that just makes they're magnetic, right? They have these magnetic personalities. People are drawn to them, and Hulk Hogan was certainly that. And Ozzy Osbourne. I'll get to Ozzy in a minute though. But so incredible, right? And I mean, and I think the other thing that it really brings into perspective for me is I'm starting to understand now at the age that I'm at, that mortality is really a thing, right? I mean, when you're a young person and somebody passes away, of course it bums you out. I'm not saying you're not sad, especially a celebrity, right? I mean, it's different, I think, if it's a family member, but, when it's a celebrity, you're like, oh, that sucks, but they were obviously getting old, or whatever, right? And now at the age that I'm at, I'm like, damn, man, wow. Hogan was only 71 years old. That doesn't seem very old, I guess, by today's standards, especially the way that medical technology is now. You would think like 71. I mean, God, I mean, and I guess too, because he had seemed so healthy, it wasn't like Ozzy, where Ozzy has seemed like, he had one foot in the grave for a while. And I apologize, Ozzy, there's no disrespect, but damn, that guy, you kind of were wondering, like, is this guy going to make it another 6 months to a year? Like, I remember watching the Osbournes thinking like, holy shit, dude, you all right, man? You gonna be all right? But but yeah. So just those two celebrity passings, and here's the weird thing for me too. I have never been one to be overly bothered by celebrity passings. Of course, it's sad. Hearing the news that anybody has passed away is sad, right? There's a natural like lament that comes to that. But I never understood those fans. Like, for example, I can think about it specifically when Michael Jackson passed, like people just crying, weeping, and like they had just lost their parent, best friend, relative, and I never understood that. I was always like, geez, like I love Michael Jackson's music. Don't get me wrong. Again, being a kid of the '80s, I mean, Michael Jackson was everywhere, and so absolutely, there was a connection to his music. But when he passed, it was for me at least. It was like, damn, that sucks. No more Michael Jackson. Jeez. But I have to say now, fast forward when I got the news that Ozzy passed, and I was at work, and a brother of mine, Norm, texted me, my wife texted me, both Maddox and Sean text me. So 4 people text me like, "Oh my God, Ozzy just died," and all 4 of us were like, "Damn!" Like, and I remember for the rest of the week last week, like I just was so hung up on that, and then. So I got the news. I don't remember what day it was, Monday or Tuesday, early in the week though, that Ozzy had passed. And then it was just days later that Hogan had passed. And it was just like this really weird. And I suddenly got it. I suddenly understood why people get so upset, when somebody passes. Because for me, Ozzy Osbourne was my introduction to hard rock and heavy metal. And I can't help but think like, yeah, when he passed, when I got that news, I just really sat back in my chair for a minute thinking like, wow, like his music through Black Sabbath and his solo music really did touch me. Like I really did have, I don't think I have a playlist where there isn't an Ozzy song on it, and who doesn't know Crazy Train, and who do, so, and then again, the Osbournes, when that came on TV and kind of introduced us to the Osbourne family, and there was just this feeling of connection, I think, with Ozzy that I'd never really felt with a celebrity before. And so with his passing, I really have to say that I was bothered. I wasn't weeping or inconsolable, and not that that's, not that that makes a difference, but I definitely had that pit in my gut, like, had the wind knocked out of me kind of feeling like, wow, that's pretty insane. And then I think the week was just kind of odd, which is going to lead me into kind of my other topic as well. But the week was just kind of odd from there, too. I felt like it was a week of like a lot of anxiety and just like a really strange week for me. And I'm going to kind of get into that topic in just a few moments. But so, it was just a weird week as it was. So then, like I said, Ozzy's passing and then Hulk's passing, like definitely just the end of an era, you know. And like I said, I think for me at least, Hogan's passing was a little more of a surprise, I think, than Ozzy. Now, Ozzy just did on the July 4th weekend, obviously just his final show back to the beginning with Black Sabbath in England. I think in his hometown or near his hometown. I'd have to look that up. But, so they had that big celebration of his music. And then, just barely 2 weeks later, he passes, which is, I guess, so that part of it was like, wow, it's that, like, here he is healthy enough to be on stage and singing. And then what happens in those 2 weeks where it's like, wow, and part of me wonders if it's like, he had something to hang in there and live for, right? Knowing that concert is coming, like it's like this. I've seen it, at least I think a lot of us have, when, when you have a relative that's sick, but they want to just make it to that one last, family event, that wedding or that whatever, that barbecue, that whatever, I think that it's, definitely human nature for when you have something to kind of strive for, live for, you hang in there, right? And then when that's all done and kind of the air is let out of the sail, I wonder if there's that that depression that comes in. It's kind of like Monday Morning Coming Down. If anybody's ever heard that song, it was recorded by Johnny Cash, um, written by Chris Christopherson, but who also recorded it. But yeah, Monday Morning Coming Down, kind of talking about, the high highs of like the Friday, Saturday party, and then, the coming down kind of, from that, and then, the depression that follows. And I wonder a little bit too if that kind of impacted at least Ozzy in this case, where he really was closing the book on he's retired. He's done retirement tours for 20 years. There I remember after No More Tears album came out, he did the No More Tours tour, and said he was done. And that's actually documented in the Osbournes, because that's around the time when his wife had the colon cancer and all that was documented in season 2, I think, of the Osbournes. But it just makes me wonder, like the humanness to that. But yeah, definitely was something that. So I've been listening. So honestly, my playlist has been a lot of Ozzy and a lot of Black Sabbath, because I've just been in that, listening to all of his music. Literally, I went through and started with his solo work. Started with Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman, Bark at the Moon, The Ultimate Sin, and just like, one album after another, No Rest for the Wicked, No More Tears, so forth, so forth. So I'm not going to just list the whole discography. You can look it up if you're that interested. But yeah, just going through, and I listened to his music, I think, with a different lens, a different ear, I guess. I don't know, but just definitely a weird week. And then dump into that, the anxiety that I've been having. So I have, since doing Vertigo, honestly, I have really started to kind of take notice of some of my own habits, and I guess doing my own kind of like mental health check, I guess, because believe it or not, that's where I pull a lot of the topics from, especially ones where I don't have guests. But even doing the episodes that I've done with guests, I have begun to notice, one, I think that we all have different struggles in life, and we all have different things that we are learning from and growing from. And so I think that's good. But I also noticed that for me, I have been stagnant for a long time, and just operating, just doing that, And I guess when I started really, and I made this comment actually, when I started Vertigo, I was like, I had been asked, like, what do you want Vertigo to be? Because I was trying to get focused on what did I want to see Vertigo, become. And, I really was like, I want it to be a space where I can really just crack the mic and let it bleed. That's what came out of my mouth. And I didn't really know what I meant by that, but I knew that I needed a space where I could just be vulnerable and honest. And I felt like that in some way was important. And Vertigo has become an outlet for me to kind of say, like, here are some things that I'm thinking about, and here are some things that I'm wrestling with, and here are some things that I'm struggling with, because I don't think that I'm alone in those struggles. I think that a lot of us share that. I also wanted it to be a place where I could be a little bit honest, too, about the fact that I do a really good job putting a front on and looking like I have things together, but I internally constantly question myself and constantly struggle. And my self-esteem has always been my Achilles heel, I struggle. I struggle with being vulnerable. I struggle with I don't want to say I struggle with being honest, because that doesn't sound, I guess, right. Because I have to say that I am mostly honest, right? I don't think anybody's 100% honest. We all have told those little white lies or whatnot, So to say that I'm 100% honest would be false, because I don't think anybody's 100% honest. I think, though, that I am truly honest when it counts, and I think that I am also honest, when it matters. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. We've all done the, hey, your buddy, your spouse, whoever said, hey, does this shirt look great on me? And in your mind, you want to say, like, Not really, but you go, yeah, that looks great. Just wear that. Maybe that's just me. Maybe there's other people out there who are like, fuck no, if it looks bad, I'm going to tell you it looks bad. Maybe that's a bad example, but I could think of several times in my life when somebody was like, hey, what do you think of? And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. And in my mind, I'm like, fuck, but, yeah, we're just going to leave that right there. But what I have really been wrestling with and what I want to kind of talk about is conflict. Just that, for me, I have noticed, and it doesn't matter if it's in a relationship with, it can be my relationship with Minna, my spouse. It could be a relationship with a coworker. And so I'm not saying that it has to be an intimate relationship, I guess is what I'm saying. Just relationships in general. I find that there is an awful lot of anxiety that arises for me when I know that there is conflict coming or rising or is right in front of me. The amount of anxiety that brings on for me is just absolutely incredible. And I have noticed that I want to avoid conflict at all costs. And so I started kind of digging into that. Like, what is that about? Like, what is it about myself, that I find being involved in and conflict isn't always negative, right? Conflict just means that there is possibly a difference in opinion, keeping it in the simplest of terms, even at work. Maybe I have one way that I want to handle a problem and somebody else has another way that they want to handle a problem. That's a conflict, right? They're the same problem, two different solutions, and now we got to figure out which solution we're going to go with. In its simplest form, that's conflict. And I know for me, and I did an episode about this a few episodes back, so if you want to go and check that out, but I talked about being a people pleaser. And in that episode, I had talked about like how I definitely am one of those people who will put others' needs and making sure other people are happy and good and safe, and I will do all of that in place of my own. I kind of put myself second to a lot of those in those instances. And that's not healthy, A. And B, that right there sets the stage for also entering conflict, because in my well, I'm going to actually read this to you. So hold on. I'm going to pull this up because I found this, and this is just a general I found this on Quora, so it's not like it's like the most incredible, whatever. It's not science-based. It's not fact. It's fucking Quora, okay? I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but so I found this very interesting. Now, the author of this piece, okay, does identify as a spiritual and a personal relationship coach, okay? So I guess they are at least a professional in this. And one of the things that it talked, so the Quora question was, right, why do I always feel like I'm going to be in trouble when conflict arises? All right. And I found that to be very interesting because when there is anxiety around conflict, if I peel back the layers to its most basic, I guess, thought kernel, to the most basic of kernels, my anxiety stems from somehow feeling either inadequate or like less than, or I'm going to be in trouble for having a different opinion in this argument, right? And again, that's the basics. That is what conflict is in its simplest form, right? Conflict doesn't have to be a knockout, drag out fight. It's just the fact that again, same problem, alternative views on how to come to that. But I did find this very interesting. So I am going to quote Miss Leanne Farger Knowles, who is the author of this. And it says, right, I'm just going to wildly take a guess, and we'll see how close I am. Now, for me, I think that it says a lot. But One of your caregivers in your childhood constantly blamed you for anything bad that was happening in your environment. You were made responsible for everything. Somehow, you're always to blame. If things went pear-shaped, even if things had nothing to do with you at all, somehow it ended up being you to blame. When we grow up under a certain regimen, as adults, we tend to continue and operate under the same rules of that regime. Not regimen, regime. And I want to think about that for a minute, because I've made the comment on Vertigo before: what we live, we learn; what we learn, we practice; what we practice, what we become; and what we become has consequences. Let me say that one more time. What we live, we learn; what we learn, we practice; what we practice, we become; what we become has consequences. Okay? So, if we think about our families as being regimes, which they are, we grow up under a certain regime, okay? We understand that. We know how to survive that. So then we take that and we enter adulthood. And we can now see how cycles begin, because it's the changing of the guard. But what did the guard learn? The guard learned from the old regime. We are being handed off, and so maybe we've made some tweaks, because I can think of every single one of us as a kid who was like, I'm not going to be like when I get older, right? Insert whomever that was targeted to. I'm not going to be like when I get older. I'm going to do things different. And for the most part, I think that we do try. I think that most of us do want to at least break cycles that we knew were unhealthy for us. However, I think that the action part of that is way more difficult than we ever imagined. And I also think that it becomes extremely difficult to do it by ourselves. Like, for some reason, well, and I guess that's where therapy and things come through. Like, we do need, guidance, and sometimes I think it's because, we just can't possibly point out all of those things within ourselves without somebody kind of holding a mirror up for us. And so that's part of it too. But yeah, so we are certainly learning how to interact with our family, with our caregivers at young ages. And then, of course, when we're young, we're doing a lot on emotional because we're learning. So we don't have the foundation yet to really, we only have our five senses, right? Smell, touch, hearing, seeing, and then I guess the emotional. Right? And so we can only do it off of those five senses. And so what we see, what we hear, how that makes us feel, this is how we start to learn in those early phases, And I really started to think about this because then a lot of things kind of pulled in for me personally, right? I have what they call Swiss cheese brain. And this has been, talked about in therapy. And so Swiss cheese brain means that the way that I grew up with a massive amount of adrenaline always flowing through the body, and which erodes at the brain because the brain is still developing. My brain was still developing, and yet I was in an environment where I needed to really, in our most basic function of life, in our most basic snake brain of life, right? We need to survive, and we do that by fight or flight. Okay, and so when we are young, that fight or flight is very much enabled, And so, but what also happens with fight or flight is the release of adrenaline and cortisol, which are stress hormones. And it has been proven scientifically and medically that high, I don't know what word to use, I guess doses, but high levels of cortisol and adrenaline in the body erode at the brain. It's not healthy. It's meant to be quick, right? So, for example, there's a deer. Think about the savannah, desert. There's a elk, a deer, whatever, grazing, and a lion comes to take out the deer, and the deer runs. Right, that is cortisol, that is adrenaline that is pumping through that deer because it's in survival mode. It knows that it's got to run, it's got to get away. Okay, once it gets away, or it gets eaten, well, there's only one or two things that are going to happen here, right? But we're going to say it gets away. All right, so it gets away, and then those levels drop right back off, and it goes back to grazing. It's not in danger anymore. Well, humans, we have obviously a higher intelligence, and so for us, pathways start developing on, okay, this is how I stay safe. And then what happens is we start getting imprinted upon learning starts to happen. And so we then take these things that we've learned, right, and then we become that in our adult life. And then we have decisions to make on, how long am I going to let this impact me? And if it even becomes noticeable. For me, it's noticeable at this point in my life. So, definitely something that I need to be paying attention to. So let me also go back for a minute and, just talk about, too, with the Swiss cheese brain. Why I brought that up is because it is normal for folks like myself who have the quote-unquote Swiss cheese brain. So what that means is I don't really have solid foundational childhood memories. Matter of fact, I remember high school and even college hanging out with buddies, and everybody starts talking, especially when it gets like, the school break times when everybody's going to be going home to family. So, holidays, especially summer break, of course. But everybody starts talking about like, oh, I remember when I was 5 or 6 years old, my family for, every summer went to the, lake house or went here or whatever. So for those of us with Swiss cheese brain, like we don't necessarily have those childhood memories. And so it's really hard for us to identify with other people on that level. For me, it just meant that I just made stories up about what my family did, because it's not that we did or didn't. I didn't really have a solid memory of what we did do or didn't do, I guess. Even now, like it's difficult now. When my sister comes on, for example, it's difficult for me to remember times of my childhood, I struggle with that because one, it's kind of embarrassing, right? Like you want to be able to cling to something that made you happy in your childhood or that you did as a child. And it's like, for me, it's like, what's the best way to put it? And I'm going to really age myself here because I know not everybody's going to know what I'm talking about, but there was this toy. I can't remember what it was called, but it looked like red goggles, and they had like a little switch on the side of it, and you put this picture disc in it. It was literally a white circular disc that had basically like negatives in it, pictures, and you put that into the Viewmaster, and then you would flick the switch and you could see all the pictures in the Viewmaster, right? And that's how my memory operates. I have these like little snapshots of things that I kind of remember, but not really, and so so that's Swiss cheese brain, and that comes from growing up in a family where there has been trauma. I'm an adult child of an alcoholic. There is absolutely trauma that went on in my household, and so but yeah, so going back now to the conflict resolution. So I just found this very interesting that the early setup is, right, that in childhood, if you were, if there was something that was impacting you as a child, the body remembers. So like, I don't necessarily remember, this is my point in reading that little bit to you. I don't necessarily remember what happened per se, right, to make me feel whatever kind of way, right? I don't necessarily remember like, oh, I was dealt with in this way, for example. I don't remember that. But my body obviously remembers that, because as conflict approaches or comes up, I immediately just go into almost a panic attack. And like I said, simple, simple, simple. I'm not talking about like wanting to fight some dude. Now, here's the interesting thing. I've also noticed that in life, I have had no problem if anger needs to be shown. That's not a problem. Um, there are several stories that I am not going to tell that have come up from my boys, especially, um, where I have been in situations where there was conflict in and around a fight, an altercation, and I have to say that those situations were not uncomfortable. And I look back at that now as a near 50-year-old man and say, that's a problem, right? I have a problem sitting down and trying to maybe talk about difference of opinion without having a panic attack. But if we want to go to blows, why is that more comfortable? Why is anger so much more comfortable? And that's crazy to me and not okay. And we'll talk about that on another episode, I'm sure. But, just wanting to kind of acknowledge that, conflict in different forms, I feel like, I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with that. But anyway, so I have, my task for myself has been like, how am I really going to deal with this? Like, how am I really going to dig in? And so I think therapy helps. And I notice one of the things that is really important is understanding that, like, I am not in trouble. We're not in trouble for having a difference of opinion. It's actually healthy to have a difference of opinion. And the other thing to really kind of come into an understanding of is conflict is part of life, and conflict also helps us grow. If everybody were just the same all the time, then boy, we wouldn't be growing, we wouldn't be changing. So the challenge for myself is to accept conflict and understand that this is an opportunity to grow. But overcoming what the body remembers and overcoming what the body feels is sometimes feels like such a tireless effort, because that means reining in the anxiety, reining in the fear, reining in all of these feelings that are trying to just explode out, right? And feeling overwhelmed, feeling, hurt for some reason, I don't know. There's just all these feelings that seem to betray me at times, and I just wish that I knew a better way to kind of deal with that, I guess. And that's what this episode is like vocalizing that, putting that out as a vulnerability, and also kind of putting that out as a challenge to myself to say, conflict is neither good nor bad. It just exists, and it's how we enter into that space that makes it healthy, unhealthy, good, bad, whatever, term you want to apply to it. And for me, I know that where I need to push myself and grow is to say, like, it is okay to stand up for yourself. It is okay to have a difference in opinion, and it is okay to verbalize that. And that doesn't mean that it has to end in some negative, form. And so my challenge is to enter into those conversations and to stand up for myself a little bit, I guess, to have that understanding of, like, you can do this, and to have some self-esteem, I guess, really take charge a little bit, kind of, not want to run, hide. I'm an avoider, man. I will avoid it all. If there's something I don't want to talk about, or if there's something that I just don't want to, I will hide and avoid, man. And that is not a healthy way. But yeah, so my challenge to myself is to be better about addressing conflict head on, understanding that, and trying to overcome the part of the body that is holding on to this negative energy, and really kind of just getting rid of that and understanding that, like, as an adult. And I think this is where healing the inner child comes in. And I'm not a psychotherapist, as you all know, but I definitely have done so much reading, research over the years on all of this. And so for me, the inner child is screaming, like, this isn't good, this isn't good, this isn't good. And the adult Sean needs to look at little Sean and say, hey, I've got this. And I know that maybe your experiences weren't the greatest, but as an adult, I know now how to handle this, and I've got it. And it's amazing how just doing that can really lessen a lot of the anxiety. I physically have to say to myself, and sometimes even out loud, like, Sean, whoa, I got this. Everything's okay. Everything is fine. There isn't anything to be upset about. There isn't anything to be worried about. There isn't anything that's going to happen to you. All is well. All is good, buddy. And yeah, and that's been my challenge. So yeah, so thank you for joining me as I talk about, this stuff, and hopefully maybe it's something that's helping you too, or maybe you've got comments that you wanna throw in there, and so I would be more. I would love to hear from you, is what I'm going to say. I kind of lost my train of thought, but I would love, 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 love to hear what your comments are in regards to some of this stuff. And, and if you want to this is striking an interest for you and there's something that you want to talk about coming on the show, again, let me know. You can email me, vertigopod@gmail.com. You can reach out on Facebook. I know I haven't been very active on Facebook. As you know from listening to these episodes, I have very much a love-hate relationship with social media. I really, really, really am trying, but I got to be honest, I struggle with social media. I really do. I don't know, man. I am just one of those people, like, I have zero interest in social media. I mean, zero. I have tried several times to, be on Facebook, whatever, Instagram. I think I even tried for a minute. I just really don't give a shit about it. Like, I have no interest in posting pictures. I don't, and I'm not sorry for it, to be honest with you. I understand that it's the way of the world right now. I understand everybody's on social media. I understand everybody has, at least some form of social media, whether it's Facebook, whether it's TikTok, whether they're on X, whatever, the platform is, Instagram. I understand that it's there. I just, for some reason, it is not on my radar, man. So I apologize. I understand also, too, that for Vertigo and having this podcast, that social media is important. It's a way to connect with people. It's a way to, spread the word that episodes are dropping. It's a way to grow this thing. And even knowing all of that, I'm still like, I just, I don't know. I really have this, and I apologize if this is offensive, but I have this attitude of listen if you want to listen, and if you don't want to listen, that's fine. And I feel like word of mouth will spread. People are like, oh, you got to listen to Vertigo. To me, that is the ultimate compliment, right? Like, if someone were to say, hey, you should be listening to this show, this is a good show, like, that to me is more exciting than me pushing it hard on Facebook. I would rather somebody organically find it or listen to it or whatever. And I understand that we live in an environment now and in a world where, you kind of need to push things on social media, but man, it's just not my jam. So I apologize. However, if you want to, if you do comment, and this is and actually this is a good point to bring up real quick. I use Spotify creators to record and release. I'm really starting to get, now that I've done this for quite a few episodes, I'm looking at other options like Podbean, for example, so that I can be released on more platforms, and so that people have the opportunity to hear me on more than just YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And I've really just kind of been disappointed in Spotify creators lately and the algorithms and such. So it's even pushing me harder to kind of look outside of that. So, I understand that it's a little bit of a pain right now because you can only find Vertigo on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple. And I definitely know that there's way more platforms than that. So that's going to be a goal for Vertigo in the future, is to, get using a different, different forum, different, place to release them. So, but word of mouth is what I'm saying. Word of mouth is like the best, feeling that you can get, because it's growing organically, and Vertigo is growing. So, and I appreciate that. All right. So yeah, we covered, we lost Hulk Hogan. We lost Ozzy Osbourne, two significant losses in the world, I think. No one's ever had anything bad to say about Ozzy too. If you look at all of the comments that have been out there about Ozzy Osbourne, people just talk about how much he was just loved and how incredible that is. Um, so yeah, so just incredible. And so with that being said, I hope that everybody has a great week. We've already kind of talked about my playlist. Yeah, it's been a lot of Ozzy, obviously, this past week. Just kind of celebrating his life. Rest in power, Ozzy Osbourne. Also, Hulk Hogan, man, again, we talked about the end of an era, man. Definitely coming to a close. So, rest in power to Hulk Hogan and Ozzy Osbourne. But yeah, spent a lot of time listening to Ozzy this week. And I hope that everybody has a great week. I hope that you are living your best life. And I also just want to say thank you again for listening to the Vertigo podcast. And as I was talking about just literally seconds ago, if you are enjoying this podcast, please let somebody know about it. That to me is how I really want this thing to grow. Because, like I said, I don't really give a shit about social media, but I do care about your opinions and I do care how you think. And so, if you want to share this, with somebody else, please let them know that it's here. And like I said, hopefully I'll be on more platforms soon as I start to make changes and kind of get those things in order. So, all right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. This is your host, Sean, and I hope this episode made your head spin. Take care, Vertigo Nation.